we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial as reported by Inner City Press. No one expected him to speak, not the courtroom, not the press, and definitely not the man sitting at the defense table. But when Brad Pitt walked in, alone, unannounced, and ready to testify, everything changed. This wasn't about a film. This wasn't about fame. What he revealed was something darker, something powerful, and something that had been buried for years. Until now. Because what Brad Pitt exposed on day 14 of the trial wasn't just a bombshell. It was a secret that could unravel everything. The judge called the next witness, routine, measured, like every name before it. But then came two words that shattered the rhythm of the room. Bradley Pitt. For a moment, everyone thought they'd misheard. The press section stiffened, one juror dropped their pen. Even the court reporter froze with her fingers midair, hovering over the keys. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. And in stepped the man himself, Brad Pitt. Not on a red carpet, not surrounded by flashing cameras, not filtered through magazine headlines. Just Brad, walking forward under fluorescent courtroom lights. No entourage, no designer shades, just a muted gray suit, and a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. The transformation was jarring. This wasn't the man audiences had seen smile his way through decades of movie premieres. This wasn't the Hollywood icon with the effortless charm. This was someone else. Someone smaller, more weathered, quieter. He walked toward the stand with a deliberate kind of stillness, like each step cost something. His shoulders were square, but heavy. His hands clenched, his eyes unreadable. As he reached the front, the clerk asked him to raise his right hand. He did. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" He nodded, not a single word yet spoken. He took his seat, adjusted the microphone, and paused. 10 seconds? 15. No one moved. It wasn't just the silence, it was the weight of it, as if the room knew, before a word was even said, that something massive was about to unravel. Then finally, Brad spoke. His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't even particularly clear. It came out low, even, like someone forcing themselves to stay upright while every memory in their body begged to stay buried. "I never thought I'd have to speak about this. Not here, not like this." That's all it took. The courtroom tilted. Suddenly, no one saw Brad Pitt the celebrity. They saw Brad Pitt the man, one who'd carried something heavy, quietly, for years. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Mr. Pitt, when did you first meet Sean Combs?" Brad looked up, not at the jury, not at Diddy, but somewhere above everyone, like the memory was playing just over their heads. 2018, he said. Oscars after party, Beverly Hills. And with that, it began. What he was about to say next wouldn't just rock the courtroom. It would rattle every assumption people had about fame, power, and silence. The year was 2018, an Oscars after party in Beverly Hills. The kind of room where every smile is calculated, every drink a performance. The powerful orbit the powerful, and everyone pretends they're just hanging out. Brad wasn't there to be seen. He never is. That's part of what makes him Brad Pitt. Present, but never available. Always somehow hovering just outside the Hollywood machinery, even while sitting right in the middle of it. That night, Diddy approached him. There was no entourage, no flash, just Diddy, calm and collected, sliding into Brad's orbit like it had been pre-planned. He didn't open with praise for a role, didn't mention Fight Club or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Instead, he said, "I admire how you disappear. You're everywhere, but no one can ever touch you." Brad smiled politely, but something about the way Diddy said it made him pause. It wasn't flattery, it was interest. The kind that wasn't about celebrity, the kind that felt strategic. Then came the invitation. "You should come by sometime, just us. Talk like men, real men." Brad hesitated, not because he felt threatened. Diddy wasn't aggressive, he was inviting, almost hypnotic. "I should have said no," Brad would later admit, but something about it didn't let go of me, like a thread I couldn't stop pulling. A week later, it was midnight. Brad found himself pulling up to Diddy's mansion in Los Angeles, a compound more than a home, gated, silent, dimly lit like a set designed for something you don't talk about afterward. Diddy answered the door himself. Silk pajamas, no shoes. Calm. "No small talk after dark," he said with a grin. Brad didn't know what that meant, but it was clear he wasn't there for casual drinks or movie talk. The inside of the house felt curated, not decorated. The air was thick with incense. Mirrors everywhere, but never where they made sense. Music played from hidden speakers, ambient, looping, unresolved, a rhythm that led nowhere. It felt like a dream, Brad said, but the kind where you know something's wrong. You just can't wake up. He could have left, probably should have, but he didn't. He stayed. "Not because I trusted him," Brad explained, "because part of me didn't want to believe my instincts." That night didn't end in violence or scandal. There was no headline moment, but it was the start of something Brad would spend years trying to untangle. Something that didn't look dangerous from the outside, but once you stepped into it, you couldn't walk out the same. The first part of the night felt strange, but manageable. Just a rich man's eccentricity. But then, Diddy said 5 words that would change everything. "Let me show you something." Brad followed, down a hallway he hadn't noticed before, behind a door with no handle, and then down, beneath the house. He expected a wine cellar or a private theater, some over-the-top billionaire flex. What he found was something else entirely. A ritual space, he would call it later. That's the only word for it. It didn't feel lived in. It felt staged, like a set built for something no one was supposed to talk about. Steam drifted from the walls. Candles flickered, already lit. The air was thick with smoke and silence. Every surface, every angle reflected, because mirrors covered everything. Ceiling, floor, walls. But none of those reflections felt like Brad. At the center of the room was a built-in steam shower, glowing softly under amber light. Diddy walked over, calm as ever, and handed Brad a glass of something dark. "You've made it," he said. "Now let's clean off the rest of who you used to be." Brad blinked, trying to process what he meant. Was this symbolic? Was it a joke? Then Diddy began to undress. "Come in," he said. "It's just water. Just trust." Brad refused. He said no, but Diddy didn't push, didn't touch. He just waited, with a smile, not forcing, but expecting. And that's when Brad said he felt it. The weight, the pressure, the kind that doesn't come from words. "I stepped in," Brad admitted, "because the silence around me felt louder than the word no." They stood under the water. No conversation, no touch, just the soft hiss of steam and the pounding of Brad's own heartbeat. Outside the glass, staff moved quietly, like shadows. Upstairs, Diddy's family was home. That detail stuck with Brad more than any other. That made it worse, he said, because it meant this wasn't hidden. It was normal. Nothing sexual happened. Not that night. Not in that room. But Brad said the emotional confusion, the intimacy implied, the trust demanded without consent, was more disturbing than anything physical. Diddy whispered strange phrases in the steam. "This is how kings reconnect. You're safe now. You're with me." Brad stood there for nearly 10 minutes, and when it was over, Diddy handed him a robe and said, "Come back whenever you want to feel real again." Brad left that night and didn't sleep for 3 days. But here's the part that haunted him most. He still came back. Because once you enter that world, he said, you don't walk out untouched. You don't walk out clean. And in that courtroom, years later, as he spoke those words, no one moved. Not the jury, not the press, because everyone felt what he meant. This wasn't just a shower, it was an initiation. Weeks passed. Brad stayed quiet. But something had changed. He felt it in how he looked at his own reflection, in how he avoided mirrors, in how every silence now felt like a question he didn't want to answer. Then came the invitation. Not a text, not an assistant's call, a gold envelope, thick parchment, no address, no explanation, just 5 handwritten words. Come with nothing, leave with nothing. It was beautiful and ominous. When Brad arrived at the mansion, he didn't go through the front. He was led quietly through the kitchen, past staff who said nothing, and into a hallway he hadn't seen before. At the end of that hallway, a room lit entirely by blood-red chandeliers. There were no chairs, no table settings, no centerpieces, just a long, clear glass table and mirrors. Always the mirrors. Music played softly, classical, but warped. The same few notes looped endlessly, just out of sync. Then Diddy entered, naked, calm. He didn't explain. He didn't welcome Brad. He simply gestured toward the table and said, "Lay down. Breathe. This is communion." Brad hesitated. His instincts screamed. But Diddy didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, he just waited. Again. And Brad gave in. Again. They lay side by side on the glass, silent, still, exposed. "No food, no eye contact, no words," Brad said. "Just breathing, just the sound of ourselves echoing off the walls." It went on for nearly an hour. Then Brad left. Confused? Number. Hoping it would be the last time, but it wasn't. It happened again, and then again. By the third dinner, Brad couldn't lie to himself anymore. He started noticing things, details that didn't belong in a private dinner. Tiny black lenses, embedded in chandeliers, reflections in the mirrors that didn't align, gaps, angles, sightlines. Someone, somewhere, was watching. That night after leaving, Brad confronted Diddy. "Is this a performance? A film? Are you recording me?" Diddy smiled. "No one believes art unless it's archived?" That answer landed like a trapdoor. Brad didn't sleep. He ripped the mirror out of his own bathroom wall. He searched his home for hidden cameras. He started locking doors he'd never locked before. "I didn't know if I was paranoid," he said, "or finally seeing it all clearly." But what he did know was this. He wasn't being invited to anything. He was being conditioned. "I wasn't being fed," Brad told the courtroom. "I was being documented." And worst of all, he didn't know if he was the only one, or just the only one still trying to get out. After the third silent dinner, Brad stopped returning calls. He didn't reach out. He didn't come back. But silence, in that world, wasn't interpreted as a boundary. It was seen as defiance. That's when the envelope came, delivered directly to Brad's private residence. No courier service, no return label, just a navy blue leather-bound document with gold lettering across the front. Wellness agreement, private communion protocol. It looked like something from a boutique luxury spa, but inside, it was something else entirely. Brad flipped through the pages, and what he read stopped him cold. It wasn't metaphor, it wasn't branding, it was a contract. No verbal acknowledgement of shared cleansing experiences, no discussion of gathering formats, location, duration, or even attire. All silence, the contract stated, shall be honored as consent. It wasn't a suggestion, it was legal, signed, notarized. Diddy's name at the bottom, Brad's name printed clearly at the top. "I thought it was a prank," Brad said, "until I saw the seal." He didn't sign it. He refused. But that didn't seem to matter, because within days, the world around him began to shift. Phone calls that used to be returned within hours now went unanswered. A major charity deal, one Brad had spent months negotiating, suddenly vanished. No explanation. Just gone. And then, the rumors started. Quiet, strategic, planted. "Brad's going through something. He's not stable right now. Maybe he's just lost it." His publicist noticed. His agent noticed. So did the producers circling his next project. And then came the gifts. Not the kind anyone would want. One arrived at his vacation home in Santa Barbara, a bundle of incense sticks soaked in a strange chemical resin. Another at his LA residence, a matte black candle, molded into the shape of a faceless human figure. And at a third location, his Colorado retreat, he received a single white feather suspended in glass. No notes, no sender, no coincidence. Brad asked his assistant to trace them. There was nothing to trace. But the final message didn't come in a package. It came during a storm. A handwritten note slipped under the gate. Water had warped the paper, but the message remained intact. "You're in the Brotherhood now. Don't break the circle." Brad paused as he recalled that moment in court. His voice lowered. "I didn't know what the Brotherhood meant, but I knew this. I wasn't asked to join. I was taken." The jury sat still. The air was thick. You could feel it. something shifting in the room, because this was no longer just about creepy dinners or whispered invitations. It was about something far more calculated, control through compliance, and silence as the ultimate contract. After the note, Brad didn't sleep, not just from fear, but from the realization that fear was now part of his routine, like brushing his teeth, like locking his doors twice instead of once. He was unraveling, not in public, not visibly, but internally, quietly. And that's exactly how Diddy wanted it. It wasn't about being hurt, Brad said. It was about being erased, slowly, strategically. It started with the phones. Contacts he'd known for 15 years just stopped picking up. Agents went silent. Producers who had once chased him now ghosted him. Then the project fell apart. A major film nearing its final contract stage. A role Brad had been shaping for months, suddenly shelved. No meetings, no rewrites, just gone. And when Brad asked why, all he got was a text from a producer. One sentence. "You upset someone you shouldn't have. I can't help you this time." He deleted it immediately. Not out of panic, but out of instinct. Because Brad finally understood what this was. This wasn't reputation damage. It was containment. And it wasn't the public being manipulated. It was Hollywood itself. The people in rooms where nothing gets written down. The ones who operate off favors, favors owed, and silence bought. "I thought I was too big to be controlled," Brad said. "Too old, too established, too seen." But fame, he learned, is just a louder disguise. And then came the final act of control. Spring 2022. A man appears outside his Los Feliz home. Not a delivery driver, not a fan, just a figure holding a sleek black box. He doesn't speak, doesn't explain. He simply hands it to Brad's assistant and walks away. Inside, photographs, dozens of them. Brad in the shower, in the basement, close up, overhead, side angles he hadn't even considered. Diddy was in several of them, posed, watching, smiling. They weren't pornographic, but they were violating, and they weren't random. They were proof. "The point wasn't to shock me," Brad said. "It was to remind me I had already consented. I just didn't know it." But the worst wasn't in the photos. It was on the USB. Brad said it took him hours to open the file. He just stared at it, knowing what was coming, but not ready to confirm it. When he finally pressed play, it was everything he feared, and more. Clips from the dinners, footage of the mirrored rooms, overhead shots of the cleansing, moments he couldn't even remember happening, and then the final video. Diddy, alone, speaking directly to the camera, speaking to Brad. "There's beauty in power," he said, "especially when it's borrowed. You borrowed mine, Brad. Remember that." Brad said the screen blurred after that. Not from the video, from the tears he hadn't let fall in years. He showed it to his lawyer. The advice? Don't escalate. Don't retaliate. It's too dangerous. You'll lose everything. So he stayed quiet, locked the box away in a deposit vault. But his mind? That was harder to lock. "I still hear the shower," he told the jury. "I still hear the music. I still see the mirrors." The black box didn't just document his silence, it tried to own it. But for the first time, Brad was starting to understand. The only way out of that kind of control was through exposure. There's a moment when fear becomes fatigue, when silence stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like a prison. For Brad, that moment came in 2021. After months of being followed by shadows he couldn't name, ghosted phone calls, vanished projects, faceless threats, he made a decision. "I couldn't keep pretending this was a misunderstanding," he said. "I needed to look him in the eye, and I needed to say it out loud." The opportunity came in the form of one of Diddy's infamous invitation-only parties, held in Miami, a place where the ultra-elite drift between rooms like characters in a play with no script. One room thumping with jazz, the next pulsing with electronic bass. Two realities existing at once, one for appearances and one for obedience. Brad wasn't invited. He showed up anyway. He didn't bring security. He didn't call ahead. He just walked in. I had to see him. I had to break whatever spell was still lingering inside me. He found Diddy upstairs, in a velvet lounge, alone, drinking. Almost like he'd been waiting. Brad didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just spoke, clearly and finally. I don't want this. I'm not part of this. I'm not here for your rituals. Whatever you think this is, it's not friendship. And Diddy? He didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He just smiled. You can leave, he said, but you'll never be clean again. Brad froze when he heard that, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. That sentence broke me, he said on the stand, because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I couldn't undo it. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't wash it off. He left the party that night with nothing but the weight of that line echoing in his head. And within a week, the consequences came fast and sharp. A major film deal collapsed. Producers stopped answering, former allies started distancing, no scandals, no headlines, just a quiet erasure. It wasn't revenge, Brad said. It was compliance, a system reminding me where the walls were. But then came the final knock. The black box, the photographs, the USB proof of everything. And suddenly, it wasn't about shame or fear. It was about survival. Because Brad realized something Diddy never counted on. He thought I'd bury it forever, but I'd rather lose my career than lose myself. That was the moment everything shifted. The moment silence was no longer an option. The moment Brad Pitt chose testimony over self-preservation. Because some prisons aren't made of walls. They're made of whispers, secrets, and silence. And the only way out is to name them. Spring 2022. It was a quiet day. Until the knock. No courier, no delivery van, just a man standing outside Brad's private gate in Los Feliz. He didn't speak. He didn't wait. He simply handed a sleek black box to Brad's assistant and walked away. No return label, no note, no fingerprints. Inside the box, photographs, dozens of them. Some printed on heavy matte paper, others glossy, sharp, almost cinematic in quality. All of them felt staged. Brad recognized the setting instantly. The basement, the mirror room, the steam. Himself, caught mid-motion, in profile, overhead. He saw angles that didn't make sense, shots taken from places no one had been, from ceilings, from corners behind glass. And then he saw Diddy in the frame. In several of the photos, Diddy stood beside him, nude, relaxed, smiling, not with shame, not with apology, with pride. They weren't sexual, Brad said, but they were intimate, violating, manipulative. That was the point. These weren't souvenirs, they were trophies. And there was more. A USB drive tucked into the bottom of the box. Brad didn't open it right away. He said he sat with it for hours, staring at it like it might explode. Eventually, he loaded the files. What he found was worse than he imagined. Video footage, clips from inside the ritual dinners, grainy black and white surveillance, wide angles, slow pans. No audio, just silent, looping images of bodies lying still on glass, surrounded by mirrors. Brad saw himself, saw moments he didn't remember, Diddy whispering into his ear, his own eyes blank, almost dissociative. And then came the final clip, a monologue, Diddy, alone, center frame, talking directly into the lens. "There's beauty in power," he said, "especially when it's borrowed. You borrowed mine, Brad, remember that." Brad's hands shook on the stand as he relived it. That's when I knew. This wasn't blackmail. It wasn't leverage. It was proof. Proof of what had happened. Proof that Diddy didn't need to threaten him anymore, because he already had documentation. He wasn't holding it over me, Brad said. He was showing me that I belonged to him, that my silence was no longer mine. He contacted his legal team the next morning. Their advice? Say nothing. Don't speak. Don't fight this. You'll lose everything. And maybe they were right. But Brad had already lost something more important. His sense of self. "I moved the photos to a vault," he said, "but the memory followed me everywhere." He couldn't sleep. He couldn't trust his own home. He tore mirrors off his walls, stopped hosting people, stopped showing up to life. "I still hear the sound of that water," he told the court. "I still hear that voice. You'll never be clean again." That phrase didn't just haunt him, it defined the entire experience. I used to think Diddy wanted connection. Then I thought he wanted loyalty. Now I know what he really wanted. He wanted trophies. And I was one of them. The room didn't move. Not a breath, not a cough, just stillness. Because this wasn't a story anymore. It was evidence. After the black box, something in Brad snapped. Not loud, not public, not even visible. But deep down, something shifted. He didn't run to the press. He didn't call in favors. He just went still. For months, I became a ghost, Brad said. I stopped going to events. I pulled back from everything. Not because I didn't want to be seen, but because I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The photos were locked in a vault, the USB hidden, but the memories weren't. The shame wasn't. The fear wasn't. And then the phone rang. Late. No caller ID, no warning. Brad answered, a voice on the other end. Male, calm, controlled, almost clinical. Tell him to keep his mouth shut or we'll shut it for him. Then, silence. No rush, no dramatics, just a fact, delivered like a weather report. Brad sat with the phone to his ear for almost a full minute after the call ended. Then he put it down and started writing. I wrote everything, he said. Every memory, every sentence, every moment I had tried to suppress. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing. The only way to take back control was to give up secrecy. He called his team together, told them his decision. He was going to testify. There was a pause. He expected resistance, maybe even panic. But what happened instead broke him in a different way. His manager, someone who had been with him through divorces, box office failures, scandals, cried. I knew something was off, he told Brad. I just didn't know how bad it was. And in that moment, Brad realized something he hadn't let himself feel in years. He wasn't alone. Others had sensed it. They just didn't know what it was. For so long, I thought I was crazy, Brad said. But now I knew I wasn't crazy. I was programmed to feel that way. He wasn't speaking out for revenge or attention or vindication. He was speaking because silence was no longer a shield. It was a cage. If I stayed quiet, Brad told the court, I would have become exactly what Diddy made me. A prop, a decoration, a man too scared to speak. So he made his decision. Not to run, not to settle, but to speak. I'm not a victim looking for sympathy, he said. I'm a man trying to make peace with the parts of myself that were trapped in that basement. The courtroom was packed. Media, lawyers, onlookers. But when Brad Pitt walked in, it wasn't the crowd that changed. It was the air. No one whispered. No one moved. It didn't feel like a performance, one reporter said later. It felt like a funeral for everything he'd kept inside. Brad sat, adjusted the mic once, and looked up. Not at the jury, not at Diddy, but at something distant, something only he could see. Then he spoke. I've played a lot of roles, he began. I've stood on sound stages in armor, in tuxedos, in rags. I've delivered lines written by legends. But what I lived with Sean Combs wasn't a script. It was real. And it almost erased me. He told them everything. The rituals, the dinners, the contracts, the silence. But more than the events, he described the impact, what it did to him, what it stole. It wasn't the rooms, Brad said. It was what happened after, the confusion, the isolation, the way I stopped recognizing myself. He talked about the mirrors he tore from his walls, the nights he stood outside his own bathroom door, unable to step into the shower, the recurring phrase that haunted him, "You'll never be clean again." Then came the moment that made the entire room hold its breath. Brad turned, he looked directly at Diddy. For the first time, their eyes locked. And he said, "You didn't break me, but you did something worse. You made me question who I was." Then he turned back to the judge. No dramatics, no anger, just truth. I'm not here to reclaim my image. I'm not here to protect my legacy. I'm here to draw a line that says, you don't get to own my silence anymore. And then, one final sentence. Not a punchline, not a closing argument, a release. You called it connection. You called it trust. But what you really built was a prison. And I've served my time. The judge called for recess, but no one moved. There was no applause, no gasps, just stillness, as if the room itself needed a minute to absorb what had just been said. Outside, reporters waited. But no one spoke. Because for the first time in a long time, Brad Pitt hadn't been performing. He had been telling the truth, and the world didn't quite know what to do with it. Brad Pitt didn't speak out because he wanted revenge. He didn't testify to trend on social media. He didn't walk into that courtroom looking for sympathy. He walked in because the weight of silence had finally become heavier than the risk of the truth. For years, he lived with something that couldn't be proven, couldn't be explained. And for a man like Brad Pitt, famous, insulated, admired, that silence was supposed to be protection. But it wasn't. It was a cage. And Diddy? He didn't just build that cage, he decorated it with ritual, with flattery, with phrases like trust and communion. But behind every gift was pressure. Behind every whispered word was surveillance. Behind every mirrored wall was a camera. And when Brad realized that, when he saw the black box, the footage, the smile on Diddy's face in those photos, he finally understood. This had never been about connection. It had always been about possession. He didn't want loyalty, Brad said. He wanted trophies. And I was one of them. But not anymore. Because on day 14 of that trial, Brad Pitt didn't just testify, he broke the contract. Not the legal one, the unspoken one. The one Hollywood never writes down. The one that says men with power get to keep their secrets because the people around them are too scared to speak. But he spoke. And now the world can't pretend it didn't hear him. And maybe the most terrifying part isn't what Brad revealed. It's what he didn't. Because if someone like him, one of the most recognizable faces in the world, could be pulled into something this dark, how many others never made it out?